Can you tell what game is behind this black screen? If you're an avid player of it, you'd probably guess the forest. Even if you've never played it, you'd most likely assume that the setting is in a forest. How about now? It's Project Cars if you really know your engine sounds, but either way, you know it's a racing game. Sound effects and soundtracks have a lot more influence than we think. They're not very popular on the consumer part, but extremely important to get right if you're a developer. And that's what this message is all about. It's directed at developers, but obviously it applies to the whole community as well. And the topic is immersion in a game. When I say a game is immersive, things like the Oculus Rift come to mind. But every game out there has its own level of immersion. You may consider The Walking Dead immerse because you only consider the choices that make sense in the context of the game. Or you may think Project Cars has a good level of immersion because of its realistic sounds and camera angles. This is a tool that can make good games great. To achieve this goal of immersion, it's important to master the so-called 5 senses. Just to reiterate, they are sight, sound, taste, smell, and touch. Obviously, in this case, taste and smell don't apply, and you're probably even asking, well, why is touch there? Well, if you use a console or have a controller on a PC, you'll notice that it has dual shocks, meaning that they send vibrations to your hand, and if done in the correct way, they can actually add a lot to the experience. People also talk about the heaviness or lightness of guns. This can be decided based on the animation to the recoil or the screen shaking. The same goes for car physics. If you play Euro Truck Simulator, you'll notice the slow acceleration actually provides a bit of heaviness. If you're like me, you'll probably hold the trigger down a little bit harder on the controller even though it has no effect. The same goes for when you're in an intense shootout on an FPS. This could basically be like a subcategory of sight, but like I said, it adds a lot to the feeling, okay? And one thing that has mostly stayed stagnant is sound. And keyword is mostly because in 2 genres it's really improved, and that is the FPS, because they want to provide thrill and action, meaning tons of explosion, firing shots overhead, and intense music, and the simulation genre, because the main goal is to be realistic, and they're getting better at that every day. Sight, on the other hand, has been the main factor of improvement, and I don't need some fancy graphs to tell you either, because if you're watching this video, you've probably been playing games for a while. For example, if you played Arma, you've probably noticed how much better its games have gotten. If you start with Combat Operations, and then Arma 2, and now Arma 3, or if the new Battlefield Hardline when you compare it to Battlefield 4. Okay, maybe not the best example. So let's compare sound to sight. So here's a short realistic sound clip of a beach. And now here's a picture of a beach. You'll notice that they both have very different aspects. It's like reading a book versus watching a movie. You paint the image in your mind rather than have it created for you. It's like hearing a guitar and seeing a guitar. You can tell what instrument it is from both forms of media, but when you combine them, that's when you create a sense of immersion. So how do we apply this to games? Well, there's no science behind it. It's really not complicated. In most game engines, you can create what are called sound bubbles. Sound is created within a sphere. In this example, we're using the Torque 3D engine, the game that powers BeamNG Drive. Basically, a sound file is played at the center of the sphere and slowly becomes quieter until you are out of it and the sound is gone. Hundreds of these can be placed around the maps and at any size, around each car as they drive by, or random guitar players in the street, even music at a certain outdoor restaurant. It just needs to be focused on and should have more priority once the structure of the game is free of flaws. This is a better time than ever too, because realistic sound should only go with good graphics. You'll notice that many pixelated games use 8-bit music. It's all about matching the theme. If you have motionless trees in your game, then you shouldn't have a wind sound. Focus on other possible sound effects, like if your game has birds, emphasize that. If your game has no waves, then you shouldn't use the sound of giant waves. Actually, in Arma 2, it kind of annoyed me. They had like no waves at all, and they used like the biggest sound clip of waves they could find. So here's an example of that. And then later in Arma 3 it was improved with a slightly lesser down version of that. So although sound isn't usually noticed, it can actually make the game feel so much better. Let's take The Forest for example, a new early access game currently in alpha. I'm sure the sounds will be improved, so in no way am I criticizing it because the game is not complete yet. But here are the stock sounds when it's raining. And now here's an MP3 of realistic rain in a forest added onto it. Not only does it make the game feel good, but the sound of the rain actually matches the visuals better because it's more of a drizzle rather than a downpour. Arma 3 also has multiple sound mods which make the guns and explosives sound much more immersive. And of course we can't forget about the soundtracks. They can have more of an impact than anything, especially with indie games, so take some time to look at the composers of the games you enjoy. You may even discover some new tracks you like. Some of my favorite composers include Austin Wintory, he made the soundtrack for Journey. Oliver Tank, his music was featured in the trailer for The Crew. LTR Tunes, I don't think he makes music for games, but a lot of YouTube channels that involve gaming use his music. And Jared Emerson Johnson for The Walking Dead. And all these guys can really make the game worth playing and watching. So maybe sound's not a huge selling point, and there may be a lot of people who don't notice it, but at the end of the day, we should be making games that we would want to play. It doesn't matter if your AAA title is on an annual release schedule, or you have to finish a product by a certain time. You may not even be making a game, maybe you're creating a presentation, or working on a video, or just sitting outside. Whatever it may be, put some focus on sound, because immersion can be one of the strongest values, and the sounds you hear may just make a world of difference.